The manga opens with a boy standing still, and we learn his name is Kushi Shirota. He notices that his desk has been moved from its original place. A few boys approach him and apologize, explaining that they rolled his desk away and ask if he still wants to use it. Shirota calmly tells them it's totally fine. He then narrates that he's the lowest of the low in both sports and academics, and that he has no friends. People don't even know he exists. To him, even the desk would be happier, being put to good use by someone else. He goes on to say that if he were ever presumptuous enough to compare himself to her, the difference would be like night and day, like apples and oranges. He then goes on to say that the only thing they have in common is that they attended the same elementary and middle school and now go to the same high school. Still, he describes her as a prodigy from day one, while he was nothing more than a failure, and the two of them barely had any interaction to speak of. Shirota further explains that, from his perspective, she was completely out of his league. He wouldn't even consider trying to befriend her, let alone become anything more. As he walks out of the school building, heading toward a spot he usually goes to in order to avoid people, he realizes something, a thought that had never once crossed his mind until now. The scene then shifts to Shirota, his gaze lingering on a girl's chest. As he comes to a realization, he never would have imagined that someone like him could ever have a special relationship with the very girl he had been talking about. Shirota then flashes back to how it all happened. He explains that it started in the gym storage room, where he had snuck in during lunch just to kill time. As he opens his phone, he realizes his next class is Akamath, and that they'll be getting their test results back. The thought hits him immediately. He's certain he failed again. Then suddenly, he hears the gym doors open and close. Shirota pauses, wondering who it could be, since no one is supposed to be in there outside of class. He looks over and sees a girl, the class president, and immediately wonders what she's doing there. Then, without a word, she begins to loosen and remove her tie. Shirota then realizes that she's changing, and he immediately questions why she would choose to do it right there. He quickly looks away, asking himself what he's even doing, knowing that staring would make him no better than a peeping Tom. He steels himself, reminding himself that even if she's the class president, the most attractive girl in school watching her change would go against all basic human decency. Determined, he tries his best to keep his eyes averted, quietly muttering to himself not to look, even as she continues to undress. But Shirota, being weak-willed, decided to peep at her and realizes that she was completely undressed, which completely shocks him. Shirota realizes she isn't wearing a bra, and he starts to wonder if she somehow forgot to put one on. But knowing the kind of person she is, he quickly tells himself there's no way she'd make a mistake like that. Still, the thought lingers, and then it fully hits him. He just saw her chest. His face instantly flushes, blushing uncontrollably, as he comes to terms with the fact that his willpower is practically non-existent. Back in class, Shirota glances over at the girl, his thoughts racing. He can't help but question why she would change in the gym storage room, and why she wasn't wearing a bra. Without meaning to, his eyes drift toward her chest again, and he quickly realizes he's doing it, caught between curiosity and his own lack of self-control. Still lost in his thoughts, the teacher suddenly walks into the classroom and tells everyone to take their seats. He announces that he'll be handing back their tests, and that they should come up to get them when their names are called. Then he calls Shirota. Shirota walks up, takes his paper, and realizes he scored a 52 inches math. He pauses for a moment, then quietly hums to himself. Even though it's still a low score, he can't help but commend himself. He actually did it this time. It's the highest score he's ever gotten, and somehow he even managed to fill out at least one subject properly. Then we learn the girl's name, Takamine. She receives a 98 on the math test, which immediately catches everyone's attention. The class begins to murmur, wondering how unusual it is, because she normally scores a perfect 100 inches every subject. Takamine then raises her hand and questions the teacher, asking if he's absolutely sure there wasn't a mistake in the grading. He calmly replies that no, there were no mistakes in how the test was graded. Takamine slowly stands up, her expression unwavering, and questions him again, asking if he's truly certain. She then begins to remove her underwear, an action that completely catches Shirota off guard. He catches a glimpse of her, his mind briefly noting how soft she looks, but he immediately snaps back to reality, completely thrown off by what's happening. Confusion floods his thoughts, as he questions why she's suddenly exposing herself in front of the entire class. And in that moment, something white thread just snaps. Then Shirota is called up by the teacher once again. He glances over at Takamine, his thoughts spiraling, and nervously wonders, didn't she just have her butt exposed? And didn't he already grab his test? As he walks up to the teacher, he mutters to himself, questioning whether he was half asleep this whole time. That has to be it, because there's no way he could have scored as high as a 52 otherwise. But then, he looks down at the paper in his hands and realizes the score is still there. A 52 on his math test. It's real. This makes Shirota realize that he wasn't dreaming at all. It was something like déjà vu. The thought lingers, making him wonder, does that mean the class president, Takamine, is about to get a 98? Then, it's finally her turn. The teacher calls her up and, as always, commends her, saying she's consistently excellent, before announcing that she's scored another perfect 100. The result completely shocks Shirota, leaving him stunned. The school bell finally rings, signaling the end of the day. Shirota quietly wonders to himself, what's going on? Something is definitely off. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't déjà vu. He's certain she got a 98. As he walks down the school hallways, the memory of what happened in the gym lingers in his mind. The encounter felt far too real to have been a dream, and that only deepens his unease. Shirota continues to think to himself that, now that he really considers it, none of it makes sense. Why would she be changing in a place like that? The more he thinks about it, the more it feels like something strange, something almost impossible, happened today. Even so, he comes to a decision. He knows he shouldn't approach her, someone he sees as nothing short of a goddess. But the thought won't leave his mind. He needs to know the truth. And so, he makes his way to the student council room and knocks. A voice from inside tells him to come in. There, he sees Takamine. She looks at him and calmly asks what he wants. Shirota, clearly nervous, gathers his thoughts and tells her that he knows this might sound strange, but he could have sworn he saw her receive a 98 on her math test earlier. Takamine then looks at him with a sharp, menacing gaze and asks if he's told anyone about it. The question makes Shirota jolt in fear, and he quickly replies, nervously, that he hasn't told a single person. Takamine stands up and responds calmly, saying she understands, then adds, almost to herself, that he saw it, and reprimands herself for being so careless not to notice. Shirota, flustered, quickly tries to correct her. He explains that he wouldn't exactly say he saw it. He only heard the teacher announce that she got a 98. Takamine then steps closer to him, her presence suddenly overwhelming, and tells him that she's not talking about the test. Her gaze sharpens as she questions him directly, asking if he saw them. Then, without hesitation, she makes it clear she's talking about what happened in the gym storage room, and whether he saw her chest. Hearing this, Shirota immediately wonders if she noticed him. He nervously tries to explain himself, but Takamine cuts him off before he can finish. She tells him there's no point in raising her voice, then steps back slightly and says they should have a more constructive conversation. Takamine gestures for him to sit and calmly asks if he'd like something to drink, offering mineral water. Shirota, still tense, nods and says, "That's fine." As she hands him the cup, Shirota hesitates, his thoughts racing. He questions what she meant by a constructive conversation, nervously wondering if she's about to decide his punishment, maybe community service, or even suspension. Lost in his thoughts and not paying attention, he reaches out at the wrong moment and ends up knocking the cup right out of her hand. Water splashes onto Takamine, soaking part of her uniform. Shirota freezes for a split second before quickly apologizing, asking in a flustered tone if it spilled on her. Takamine calmly tells Shirota that she'll wipe the water up right away. She then looks at him and asks if he was panicking, reminding him that she already said she wouldn't yell at him. As she begins to remove her wet clothing, a thought suddenly crosses her mind. She pauses, then looks at him and asks what it is he wants. Shirota, completely confused, stares back and questions what she means by that. Takamine then tells him that, in a way, this situation is perfect, and that he should take a good look at her body. As she continues to undress, Shirota is left stunned, questioning what exactly she's doing. And then, once again, that same thread of light suddenly snaps. Shirota then hears his name being called, faint at first. And then clearly, the sound makes him jolt, gasping slightly as he responds to whoever is calling him. He turns and looks over at Takamine, who studies him closely before asking if he's finally noticed. Caught off guard, he quickly apologizes. Then, noticing something strange, he looks at her and questions why she's wet. Takamine answers plainly it's because he spilled water on her. The response only deepens his confusion. Then, with a slightly firmer tone, Takamine tells him to snap out of it and wipe her down already, before she ends up catching a cold. Takamine then tells him that, especially because of him, her chest needs to be wiped properly, and urges him to just focus on that area. Shirota hesitates, but nervously agrees. As he begins wiping her down, his heart starts racing. He can feel it pounding in his chest, and a single thought echoes in his mind: how is this even happening? Trying to stay composed, he continues, reminding himself that she's the class president, but that only makes the situation feel more unreal. He starts questioning what the hell is going on, even wondering if this might somehow be the day he dies. Then Takamine looks at him and asks if he hasn't noticed anything else, anything beyond the fact that her clothes are wet. Shirota, clearly shaken, responds nervously, asking what exactly he's supposed to notice and whether he did something more than just spill water on her. Takamine suddenly grabs his hand and tells him he's too slow. Before he can react, she places his hand against her chest and says, "Here." The moment completely shocks Shirota. She looks at him and tells him that he should be able to tell just by touching, right? Then, pressing him further, she urgently asks what he notices. But Shirota isn't really listening anymore. His mind goes blank, unable to keep up with what's happening. All he can register is how soft she feels. This guy's is so down bad. Takamine suddenly kicks him in the jaw, snapping him back to reality, and tells him he's completely wrong, that he has zero observational skills. Then, with a slight sigh, she adds that, considering he just touched the chest of the most beautiful girl in school, she can't really blame him for not being able to think straight. Takamine then explains that the real answer is this. In addition to getting her wet paws, the bra she was wearing had disappeared. Hearing that, Shirota freezes, confusion setting in as he realizes he could have sworn she was wearing one. Takamine then concludes, almost casually, that this is basically her power. She then explains that her ability is called the Eternal Virgin Road. Continuing, she tells him that whenever she removes her underwear, she can undo something that has already happened. The explanation only leaves Shirota even more confused, and he questions what she means by calling it a power. Takamine simply tells him that it's exactly like what she just showed him. She goes on to explain that when she removed her bra earlier, she rewrote the outcome, making it so she hadn't avoided getting splashed in the first place. Shirota, still unable to wrap his head around what she's saying, questions what she even means. Takamine, unfazed, continues, saying she already knows what he wants to ask. First, where did the bra go after she took it off? And second, why is she the only one who remembers what she did? Shirota quickly shuts that down, saying he hadn't even thought of anything that specific. But Takamine ignores him and continues explaining. She tells him that, for the first question, the clothing she removes to activate her power is consumed, completely used up. As she gestures to herself, she makes it clear it quite literally disappears. Then, as for the second question, she tells him the answer as she opens up her chest completely, showing him and telling him that those who've seen her naked breasts retain their memory of what happened. She then questions Shirota if that clears things up for him now, but Shirota is still thinking with his third leg and tells her nothing is getting through his brain right now. Takamine then tells him she knows what he's going to ask next. And the question was, why does she have this kind of power? But Shirota is still in his mind, telling her he hasn't even gotten that far yet because he's still trying to process the influx of information going through his brain. But Takamine continues, stating that she has this power because she deserves to be number one. The claim completely shocks Shirota. His eyes widen as he asks her to repeat what she just said. Takamine, unwavering, explains further. Of course she deserves it. She's at the top of her grade in both academics and sports, and she reigns over all the students as the student council president. She goes on to mention her beauty and perfect proportions, declaring that she's number one in every possible way. Then she looks at Shirota and asks if he doesn't think the same of her. But Shirota, clearly distracted, awkwardly asks if she can do something about her chest. Takamine, not even acknowledging his comment, continues speaking. She explains that, of course, she works as hard as necessary to remain the best, but even with all her talent and effort, small mistakes can still happen. She then adds that she isn't trying to belittle him, but that he should be able to understand that, considering that nearly 90% of his life is made up of mistakes. The comment hits Shirota hard. He realizes just how harsh her words are, and at the same time, he can barely keep up with what she's even saying. Confused, he begins to wonder, was she always this blunt? Takamine then begins to explain how she first discovered her power, tracing it back to a fateful moment in 5th grade. The scene shifts into a flashback, showing Takamine as an elementary school student. Even back then, she explains, she was already the best far ahead of her peers in both academics and sports. During that year's sports festival, there was a team relay race. Takamine was the anchor, and she managed to overtake the runner ahead of her, crossing the finish line in first place. Or at least, she was supposed to. The lunch she had eaten earlier had gone bad, causing her stomach to ache so badly that she couldn't perform at her best. In the end, she finished in 2nd place. In complete disbelief, the humiliation overwhelmed her to the point where she lost control and wet herself, which shocks Shirota. He blurts out, stunned, asking if she really wet herself back in 5th grade. Takamine, unfazed, continues, saying that just shows how ambitious she was even back then. With a confident smile, she asks him, wasn't she a prodigy? That response leaves Shirota realizing that's what she took away from the entire story. Takamine then continues her explanation. She says that when she removed her soaked underwear, something changed. Before she knew it, she was standing there holding the 1st place flag. By taking off her underwear, she had rewritten the outcome, making it so she had never eaten that bad lunch in the first place. Takamine then concludes that, in other words, this power manifested out of necessity to help her maintain her rightful place at number 1. She looks at Shirota and asks if he understands. But Shirota, completely overwhelmed, admits that he doesn't understand at all. If anything, this only makes him realize just how far beyond normal she is on an entirely different level. Someone like her isn't someone he should be associating with. Takamine then questions him, asking why she would ever reveal something like this to someone as mediocre as him. That leaves Shirota even more on edge, nervously wondering why. Takamine then continues explaining to Shirota that every time she uses her power, she loses that piece of underwear. That's why she always needs a replacement. She has to carry spares with her at all times. She goes on to say that there's always a risk someone might see her changing, just like he did. Then, without hesitation, Takamine proposes something unexpected. She tells Shirota that she wants him to be her closet to follow her around, carrying her spare underwear so he can help her change anytime, anywhere. She concludes by saying, it's a role only he can fulfill, since he's the one who understands her power. Takamine then looks at him and asks if that doesn't sound like a good deal. Shirota immediately fires back, raising his voice as he questions her, wouldn't that basically make him her slave? There's nothing in it for him. Takamine steps closer to him, pressing in as she questions what he means by nothing in it. She tells him, of course there is, because he's just one of the masses. Someone whose existence barely matters. And yet, he would be the only one allowed to be closest to her. In her eyes, that alone is an honor. Shirota stares at her, taken aback, questioning if she's really saying all of this with a straight face. Realizing she might actually believe what she's saying, he turns away and starts to walk out, deciding he's had enough. He apologizes, telling her he has to go, because none of this makes any sense to him. But just as he's about to leave, Takamine calls out to him, asking if he really isn't going to be her closet. And that question makes Shirota stop in his track. Shirota turns back to her and firmly yells that no, he's not going to be her closet. He goes on to say that everything she's been talking about her so-called power sounds like complete bullshit, and questions her attitude, especially when she's the one asking something from him. After a moment, he calms down, realizing he might have gone too far. Letting out a breath, he tells her he's leaving. But just as Shirota is about to walk out, Takamine suddenly rushes toward him and bumps into him, throwing them both off balance. And the two of them trip and fall. Shirota slowly opens his eyes and realizes he's on top of Takamine. Startled, he quickly asks if she's okay. But the moment his gaze drops, he notices how exposed her chest is. He jolts upright instantly, flustered, apologizing over and over as he says he'll get off right away. But just as he tries to move, Takamine reaches out and grabs his hand. She then takes his hand and places it against her chest, saying that she approached things the wrong way, and that she should have asked him like this instead. Shirota, completely caught off guard, can't help but wonder what she even means by that. But before he can finish forming the thought, Takamine slowly inhales. She suddenly lets out a scream at the top of her lungs, loud enough to echo throughout the entire school. Shirota freezes, his face filled with shock, as he stares at her completely confused, questioning what she just did. Suddenly, a group of students bursts into the room and finds Shirota on top of Takamine. In an instant, she turns to the side, making it look as if she's being assaulted. The students rush at Shirota without hesitation. They grab him by the collar, shouting and cursing at him, demanding to know how he could do something like that to the student council president. Within seconds, they restrain him. One of them pulls out a phone and says they're calling the police, while another girl hurries over to Takamine, trying to comfort her and urging her to explain what happened when the authorities arrive. Takamine then looks over at Shirota and puts on a completely convincing act, shouting at him and claiming that he was the one who forced her down. She even goes as far as calling him a creep, making the situation spiral even further. In that moment, it feels like Shirota's life might actually be over. Still caught in the chaos, he desperately questions why Takamine would lie like this. Around him, everything moves so fast. One student is already on the phone saying the police have arrived and directing them to the 3rd floor. As the pressure closes in, Shirota is overwhelmed with a flood of thoughts and emotions, all centered on one question. Why would Takamine do this to him? He then looks over at Takamine and notices a faint smirk hidden beneath her expression. In that moment, it clicks. This was a setup, all because he refused to be her closet. He starts to wonder if this is her way of getting revenge. As the realization sinks in, Shirota steels himself. There's no way his life is going to end like this. Just then, the police officers enter the room, and a student immediately points at him, accusing him of assaulting the student council president. And in the middle of all the chaos, Takamine quietly speaks, almost under her breath, asking him, doesn't he wish this had never happened? For example, that she had never screamed? The moment those words reach him, Shirota freezes. It hits him. If she uses her power, if she rewrites things so she never screamed, then everything changes. He'd be saved. Realizing this, Shirota quickly shouts at Takamine, telling her to use her power to undo everything she's already done. But as he struggles, the students force him down, holding him in place and ordering him to stay still. Amid the chaos, Takamine calmly walks over to him and looks down, telling him that she'll do what he asks, depending on how he chooses to ask her. And as she lifts her skirt, preparing to remove her underwear, she looks down at Shirota and asks him one final question. Will he promise to be her closet? With no other option left, Shirota gives in and accepts her terms. And in that very moment, the thread snaps once again. Time resets, and Shirota finds himself kneeling before her. Takamine looks down at him with a satisfied expression and gives him a new name, Closet-kun. Back in this rewritten moment, she calls out to him once more, and this time, he responds without hesitation. Seeing that, Takamine realizes just how favorable this situation is for her, and calmly tells him that now, it seems he finally understands his place. Shirota, his expression downcast, quietly wonders what's going to happen to him now. Just a short while ago, all his hopes and fears were tied to something as simple as a test score, and now he finds himself wishing he could turn back time. Takamine notices his mood and points out that he's acting down, even after she saved him from becoming a criminal. That immediately sets Shirota off. He snaps back at her, saying that the whole situation was her fault to begin with. Takamine's expression sharpens. She questions whether that's really the kind of attitude he should have toward his mistress, and reminds him that if she wanted to, she could easily undo saving him at any moment. Hearing that, Shirota is left even more shocked and afraid. Shirota quickly bows his head in apology, which seems to satisfy Takamine for now. After a brief pause, she straightens up and announces that she's going to give him his first task. With complete confidence, she tells him what it is. He's to help her put on a new pair of panties. Takamine explains that she had to remove her underwear in order to save him, which means she isn't wearing any at the moment. She casually adds that she can't exactly head home like that, lightly lifting her skirt as she says it. Shirota, flustered, quickly asks why she can't just do it herself. Takamine looks at him and reminds him, has he already forgotten? Carrying her spare underwear and helping her change is exactly what his role as her closet is supposed to be. Takamine tells him that the panties are in her bag and urges him to hurry. Shirota hesitates for a moment, then reaches in and takes them out, his heart starting to race even faster. She watches him closely, a teasing tone in her voice, and softly asks if he would be so kind as to help put them on for her. Shirota slowly steps closer, his nerves clearly getting the better of him, and with hesitant hands, he begins to help her put them on. As soon as he finishes, Takamine looks at him and asks if he had his eyes closed the whole time. Then, with a faint smile, she commends him, saying he's actually quite a cute one. Shirota, still flustered, responds that he figured it was better that way, since he assumed she wouldn't want him seeing something like that. Takamine tilts her head slightly and shyly points out that he didn't seem to have a problem looking at her chest earlier. Shirota quickly apologizes, admitting that he knew it was wrong, but he just couldn't control the impulse in the moment. Takamine watches him for a second, then smirks, teasing him. She points out that ever since they entered the student council room, he's been trying his hardest not to look at her body, even though, deep down, she's sure he was just itching to give in to those thoughts. Flustered, Shirota immediately denies it, insisting that's not true. Takamine simply shrugs and responds calmly. That's what you call basic decency. Takamine then stands up and commends Shirota, noting that his gentle side hasn't changed, even after all these years. Her words catch him off guard, making his heart start to race. Then, without missing a beat, she tells him that she wants his help again this time, with putting on her bra, and teasingly asks if he'd like to try doing it with his eyes closed. Shirota, completely thrown off, can only stammer in disbelief, questioning, the bra too?